Just days ago, the world marked the 2021 Anti-Corruption Day. While this year's focus was on individual responsibility in fighting corruption, there is no denying the impact that widespread and pervasive corruption has had on Africa's development. Corruption is a complex social, political, and economic phenomenon that affects all countries. Corruption undermines democratic institutions, slows economic development, and contributes to governmental instability. It attacks the foundation of democratic institutions by distorting electoral processes, perverting the rule of law, and creating bureaucratic quagmires whose only reason for existence is the soliciting of bribes. Economic development is stunted because foreign direct investment is discouraged, and small businesses within the country often find it impossible to overcome the startup costs required because of corruption. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, African states witnessed how corruption further exacerbated the unprecedented disruption to their education, employment, entrepreneurial pursuits, and other opportunities for advancement. Transparency International notes that the sub-Saharan Africa region ranks lowest among global regions in the Corruption Perception Index, with an average CPI score of 32 out of 100. The African Union says that Africa loses $140 billion annually to corruption. This is equivalent to the GDP of all but 5 countries on the continent. To put this in another perspective, this amount can ensure uninterrupted power for 24 hours a day to every citizen in Africa for 3 years. Today, our focus is the cost of corruption in Africa. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me today is Dr. Austin Nweze. He's an economist and a faculty member at the Pan-Atlantic University in Lagos, Nigeria. Dr. Austin, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so let's start with a look at sort of the dimensions that corruption tends to take across the continent. And we often think about corruption merely as bribe, an exchange of money for services or favor or things like that. But it's not as simple as that. So what is corruption, particularly in this context involving the African continent?
Well, you'll find out that corruption is very endemic in Africa. And what usually happens is that the leader seizes power, through what they call election. Once they seize power, they use that power, political power, to acquire economic wealth for themselves and use that economic wealth to oppress the people. It is common knowledge everywhere in Africa, be it Nigeria, be it Uganda, be it Kenya or Tanzania. It's the same problem. Now the question is, why do they struggle so much to get political power? Because that's the shortest cut to corruption. Once they acquire that power, nobody can then ask them any question about the source of their wealth and all that. So it's so endemic in Africa. And the worst part of corruption is political corruption. You know how the elections go in Africa. They just 20 some years ago, Uganda had an election. A friend of mine from Uganda said that the election that was supposed to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, by 6 o'clock, that the ballot boxes were already filled up.
Wow.
Who voted? Who cast the vote? By 6 a.m. So it's once they acquire political power, they use it to enrich themselves and then, oppress the poor.
But we know that But Dr. Austin, let me interrupt. We know that corruption doesn't happen simply in the political sphere, particularly for investments and particularly for development and economic development. We're seeing corruption. Yes, it comes down from there. It's a byproduct. It's allowed to spread and thrive because of what's happening in the political system. But the economic implications of it in terms of the dimensions, what does Africa lose? The AU says we lose up to $140 billion annually. Where does all of this money go?
Swiss banks. There's Swiss bank. And you find that, yes, even though the economic impact is huge, World Bank says that 2 years ago, that to give power to Africa, they have an annual investment about $63 billion. Annual investment. And one individual will steal more than that amount. That's the money that could have been used to, give 24-hour light to the citizens. Now the hospitals are in bad shape. That money could have been used to revive the hospital. So, and then the citizens are poor. So that money that could have been used to build roads, to build bridges, to improve the life, the quality of life, and also standard of living of the people, have been stolen. So the people are what's up for it. Even in the corporate setting, you find that in the corporate world, they also, especially the banks, they also help to encourage corruption because this money is passed through, passed through the banks, to get to the beneficiary. So, and then some of them build tunnels in their homes where they store dollars and all that. And then when in the corporate world, when you're dealing with government, for instance, you want a contract for the government, you need to pay some money to them as facilitation fee. I have no problem with that. But if anything that will obstruct fair dealing, will obstruct good governance, that will obstruct ethics, is corruption to me.
Okay, let me ask you. Apologies for interrupting. You brought in the World Bank earlier, and I want to quote what they said. So the World Bank says corruption adds 10% to the cost of doing business. And this is a continent that is made up of small and medium-sized businesses. Let's leave the corporate world. Across the continent, SMEs provide an estimated 80% of all jobs, representing an important driver of economic growth. And in sub-Saharan Africa alone, we have over 44 million micro, small, and medium enterprises, most of them micro. And a lot of people say it's the environment, is the overall environment that many of these businesses find themselves in that forces them to stay small. So for the African business, the small, micro, medium scale African business, how does corruption cost them?
Yeah, the corruption, like the banks, the government will give money, state grant to the to small businesses, and before you assess that money, you have to part with some part of it, at least 10% of it, before you assess the fund. That's corruption. Okay? And again, such monies from corrupt practices could have been used to build up all this micro, because everywhere in the world, the micro businesses, they're not productive to the economy. They don't add much to the economy. I call them necessity entrepreneurs. Okay? So Africa needs to build big businesses. In the 18th century, the U.S., not that they planned it, the U.S. economy was a small business economy until John D. Rockefeller acquired those smaller businesses and built it into a conglomerate. Okay? So Africa should learn to partner with each other, to build big businesses. And that is opportunity and entrepreneurship. Because the micro, does not, you just add, a freelancer, you call him an entrepreneur. These are necessity entrepreneurs. So such monies could be used. Obasanjo tried building a multinational corporation, Transcorp. Okay? And then at the end of the day, all the people who were involved in that, it's just only one person that bought over all the assets of the rest. Tony Lumelu of UBA. The only person that still maintained the transport. Okay? So these are the big businesses that we should be talking about. Even the big businesses, they also, have a way of killing small businesses as well. So in the sense that they don't pay small businesses when they transact with them. They give them 45 working days. How can a small business wait for 45 working days? This is around 6 months before he is paid. So that the person has lost profit. And then the big businesses are using that money to trade and build up their own business. So you see, because the small business, Africa should transit from the micro to big businesses. Because this is where, they create more jobs, they pay their taxes, which is usually huge, to the government. They add more value to the economy than the micro level, where it's only the owner of the business,
and a few
plus maybe one or two people working with him.
Okay.
At all.
So, Dr. Austin, you mentioned, I asked you where does the money go, and you mentioned the Swiss banks. We're going to take a break now, but what we see is that it's not just national African governments that are failing citizens when it comes to the anti-corruption fight. There are a lot of foreign players who play a very significant role in the corruption on the continent. Exactly, and that's a point I want us to get into after this. The foreign actors who are fueling and, of course, pushing corruption across the African continent. What complicity and what responsibility do they bear? When we come back. And still with me on Business Edge is economist Dr. Austin Nweze of the Pan Atlantic University. Now, foreign companies have a history of bribery and corruption in their dealings with African governments and economies. Several Chinese companies have been accused of bribing senior government officials in Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, and Chad. Mining giant Glencore has been probed about its activities in the DRC. Between 2010 and 2012, the DRC reportedly lost $1.6 billion to underpricing involving mining assets. In 2020, the U.S. government found that more than $200 million was paid to Mozambican government officials and investment bankers as bribes and kickbacks. The case of the 2011 oil block deal involving Nigeria and Eni is still on. Spain's DEFEX has been accused of money laundering and bribery in several countries, including Cameroon and Angola. And there are many more. While this is not to put all the blame and responsibility on the West, I'm going to bring Dr. Austin back in here. What role, Dr. Austin, do you think foreign parties play, foreign actors, foreign governments sometimes, and more particularly foreign companies play in how endemic corruption has become across Africa?
I'm glad that you brought that issue up because Africa, even after independence, the foreign companies have been the architect of corruption in Africa. Yes, I say that. Before independence, in the 60s, Mobutu Sese Seko was given $25,000 to get rid of Patrice Lumumba. And, so imagine $25,000 that the CIA used, to do all of that. I'm just reading a book called The White Malice, and they chronicled how that the foreign companies they use. And again, you find that since the U.S. never got involved in colonialism, that they use corporatocracy what we call corporatocracy. They engage, and since 1937, they engage in corporatocracy to penetrate African countries. Bribery, and corruption were the order of the day, even up to now. Now, some of these multinational companies in Nigeria, you have the secret services working there, and they do the dirty job of corrupting the poor leaders because people are poor. People are poor. They can easily be corrupted. So you find that, yes, like the oil companies, for instance, what they did. I remember when Jonathan was president, Obama had to invite him to tell him that he should do the dealing of the oil majors. So, and Jonathan didn't play ball early enough, and that cost him his president the second time around. Okay, so you find that these big corporations, they are the ones. The Chinese, for instance, they have no morals. The Chinese have no morals. They don't know ethics. So in their own country, they practice it.
So let me ask you. So then I need to ask you, because if we're saying that these countries and companies and entities are coming in and extending the bribery, then what is the stopgap measure? Why are we then the ones accepting? We're accepting at the cost of inflated contracts. We're accepting at the cost of better healthcare, better education, better anything, livelihood for our people. So someone can give you, can offer you, but it's up to you to accept. So why do we find so many government officials across the continent accepting this hand of bribery and corruption?
Let me tell one example. In Mozambique, for instance, Russia and Saudi Arabia, they bought land. The money went to the officials of the government, including the president. They cultivate and just produce rice, for instance, to feed their own country. No single grain is sold in Mozambique. Okay? Now, that's one part of it. But the thing is that the purchasing power of the people is very, especially government officials, they're not well paid. And their jobs are not as secure as it should be. So they're not well paid. Now, this corruption, this kind of situation, it's not just Africa. Let me give you an example. Singapore, in the 60s, had a similar situation. How did they solve it? They solved it by improving the pay of the civil servant so that the gap between the private sector and the public sector will be bridged. So the money that the private sector earns maybe should be around 5% or 2% more than what the public sector earns. So that way, the public sector is paid well, the private sector is also paid well. So the gap between them is close, the gap between the pay they earn.
Okay.
So to solve this thing, why we still accept money to the detriment of our development project that could have been done is because we are not paid well. You see someone earning 10,000 naira a month. That amount is not even enough for me to have lunch.
It's not take home.
Like you. So that is.
And someone will say that amount cannot even take you home, that your take home cannot take you home.
Yes.
Dr. Austin, let me ask, I like the fact that you bring up the Singapore example. So let's go back in history a bit. It was during the 1990s and the early 2000s that many African countries actually set up anti-corruption legislation and also established anti-corruption agencies. These agencies were seen to promote good governance and also help the global anti-corruption fight. But now we're seeing that they're struggling for, I guess we'd say, independence, if we use the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission here in Nigeria and some of the criticism that the EFCC has faced. They're also fighting for other things, lack of resources. Many of them are not actually being financed the way they should be financed. And even the production of evidence, being able to produce evidence that would lead to convictions in these corruption cases that eventually make it to court. How do we strengthen these critical agencies? Many of them are now 20, 30, 40 years old, but have our countries actually seen the positive benefits of having these anti-corruption agencies take off?
Well, the thing is that for the agencies, I keep saying this, even when this present government came in, they were talking about fighting corruption. And the president was the only believer in the fight against corruption. There was no buy-in. The National Assembly, there was no buy-in. There was no buy-in with the civil service servants. There was no buy-in even with the corporate world. Let me tell you, individuals cannot fight corruption. Institutions fight corruption. Once you strengthen the institution, and imagine the minor and the pension fund, that what is in the Constitution was for him to pay, to be fined about 1,500, about 15,000 naira, which he could easily pay. The archaic laws, so the laws are weak. So if for any reason corruption is leveled against any individual, I know we don't have a sense of shame, harakiri in Japan. The Japanese have a harakiri, a sense of shame. Once caught in the corruption, they just go to the mountain and commit suicide. So if we can strengthen the institution, look at the system that institutions have. How can we improve on it? Look at the processes. How can we improve on it? Look at the structure of the institution. How can we improve on it? Look at the people that run this institution. Because when you recruit people, in the past, road safety, we're not collecting money on the road. But today, you see them stretch hand, they collect money. I have seen them several times. Okay? That when Soyinka was there, you dare not do that kind of a thing. So if you pay the people well, they will tell you there's no need to collect any backhand, money, just to obscure justice. So you need to build strong institutions, and all these things I have mentioned are the ways you build strong institutions.
Okay.
The structure of the institution, the technology you need, the people, okay, the system, the processes. That's how you may have the best of the system, but if you have the wrong people, first of all, they'll destroy the system, which is what they have done.
Dr. Austin, I apologize. I do very much apologize. Time is not with us and we have to wrap things up. But I'm taking away building the institutions, increasing remuneration, ensuring that there is legislation, building the systems that are in place, and making sure that the institutions are strengthened. It is not an individual African's fight. It is an institutionalized fight that Africa must have against corruption. Dr. Austin Nweze, thank you so much. I know we'll be touching base with you again, and I do apologize, but thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. My pleasure. Anytime. Thank you so much.
And you can see that he's very passionate about the issue of corruption, and that is how many feel. While this year's theme was, it's your right to say no, the truth is that an individual cannot fight institutionalized corruption, which is what many see across the continent. According to Transparency International, 43% of Africans live in poverty, while over $50 billion worth of stolen assets flow out of Africa every year. Institutions that are meant to control corruption remain weak, and citizens across the continent have to pay bribes to access the most basic services like healthcare and education. Corruption is deadly, and it costs Africa in lost opportunities, lost jobs, lost development, and even lost lives. You're watching Business Edge. Up next is NC4 to watch. An NC4 to watch starts in West Africa, where the Nigerian presidency has said there is no provision in the Finance Bill 2022 that states that banks will be required to request for tax identification number before opening bank accounts for individuals, and nor would existing bank account holders have to provide their TIN to continue operating their accounts. South Africa's financial regulator is planning to unveil a regulatory framework covering cryptocurrencies as early as next year to help protect vulnerable members of society from high-risk assets. The commissioner of the Financial Security Conduct Authority says the rules are designed in concert with peers like the Prudential Authority and the Financial Surveillance Board, and will establish how trading in coins such as Ethereum, XRP, and Litecoin should be conducted. Kenya Airways started direct flights from Nairobi to Juba and Khartoum. Now the carrier will be flying daily to Juba as well as 3 times per week to the Sudanese capital. The service will offer 7 weekly flights to Juba and 3 flights per week to Khartoum. And finally, KenGen's construction of 83 megawatts of Kari 1 Unit 6 geothermal plants is nearly complete and is expected to be added to the grid in early 2022. The Chief Executive Officer, Rebecca Maino, said once the plant is operational, it will help drive down the cost of electricity in Kenya by displacing thermal energy while meeting the country's growing demand for electricity. And that's it on Business Edge. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Of course, download our mobile app and take us with you wherever you go. I'll see you again soon.